terima kasih Yang Majelis. Terlebih dahulu saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada pihak Arkib Negara yang menjemput saya bersama-sama dalam konvensyen yang amat penting ini. Terlebih dahulu juga saya suka memberi penerangan bahawa saya tidak membuat kertas kerja pun. Apa yang saya akan ceritakan nanti ialah berasaskan mungkin pengalaman sedikit yang telah dilalui saya pada itu. Dan juga kalau boleh, saya juga akan membuat ucapan dalam dua bahasa. Campur bahasa Malaysia, campur bahasa Inggeris. Tapi mungkin tidak bahasa Iban, kerana nanti orang tak ada faham. Mungkin 2-3 orang ada faham. I know I met somebody who Iban here. So she would still understand Iban. Tapi bagi petang ini, cuma kita cerita dari segi menggunakan bahasa Malaysia dan juga bahasa Inggeris. Kalau saya mengingat kembali, tak payah jauh sangat. Apabila kita berucap pasal ekonomi, saya terus terang, I am quite ignorant about anything economic. Essentially, I'm very pedestrian in the topic of anything economic. So, tapi ada yang ahli-ahli panel nanti, they will be able to give you the deep meaning of what economics is like. But my experience is the importance of history and the importance of economic development as it affects individual, how he improved his life, and also in terms of regional equity, particularly in a country like Malaysia, a federation of states and region now. So, dari segi transformasi ekonomi, mungkin maksudnya, adakah tujuan untuk menentukan seimbangan ekonomi di antara kaum dan juga di antara individu dan ditambah juga bagi kita di antara wilayah. Kalau ianya tak seimbang, kemungkinan timbul rasa kurang senang, kurang puas hati. Kita boleh melihat ke belakang, misalnya di waktu koloni British dulu, di Melaya pun serupa itu. Kerana asas ekonomi Melaya masa itu lebih-lebih lagi bagi penduduk tempatan Melayu khususnya, actually smallholders, fewer small farming, juga perikanan, mencari ikan dan sungainya. Economic in the modern sense memang belum diperkenalkan dari segi trade, dari segi industri. Tetapi Melaya kaya ada tin dan juga tanahnya besar. So with the development of the tin industry came the Chinese who came to Malaya in those early days. When the British built up the estate industry, they wanted workers to work in there. So they brought the Indians to work. But that started the demographic characteristic of what Malaya was at the time of independence, 1957. Economic activities are aligned with racial following and racial thing. Unfortunately, it means those who are able to be in trade and business industry would be able to enjoy a much better income, much better cost of life. Orang yang tinggal dari segi more subsistence, more farming, in the rural countryside, mainly the Malays, will then be very much left in terms of the economic enjoyment of life. As we can see, 1969, the vision of wealth, the vision of life, tend to separate communities, and we saw 1969. And because of that, we also saw, I'm sure other people will be speaking in more deep terms on this, the new economic policy. 1971, first, to increase the wealth of the country. Second, redistribute the wealth in terms of, so that it no longer followed racial communal lines. And we did that. Malaysia did that. Kita lihat kemajuan berlaku timbul. Jadi dari segi absolute poverty, angkanya berkurangan. Juga dari segi pembahagian, dari segi suku kaum, ada dikurangkan. So, whatever the critique on the NEP may be, we now looking back, we can do a bit of critique on it. But it does help to build up a middle-class group of Malays in this country. Some are not that comfortable now. Some people are now talking. Why do we continue talking about this? We should now look at needs-based policy. Fine. But what I'm saying is that early transformation economy was intended to correct what was seen at that time to be an imbalance in terms of the communal setting. Now, I'm asked to speak more on the experience of Sabah and Sarawak. In looking at the experience of Sabah and Sarawak, saya fikir penting juga kita mengingatkan bagaimana Sarawak dan Sabah bersetuju untuk bersama-sama membentukkan satu negara yang disebutkan Malaysia. Don't forget when the idea was first mooted in 1961 by Tunku Abdul Rahman. The reactions of people in Sabah and Sarawak was quite cautious. Some definitely welcome it. Some do not want it at all. They want independence first for the state. Some third divided. One third of those probably prefer to remain in the British colony because they said, in the words of Temuang Oyong Lawai Jau, one of the leaders in the indigenous group, Orang Ulu in Sarawak, he said, in his experience as a farmer, here we are, Tunku's garden is a garden of fruit trees, mature fruit trees, fenced by billion fencing, whereas in Sarawak, there's a new planted saplings of fruit surrounded by bamboo fencing. And in his experience as a farmer, he said, the chance of that being able to grow and bear fruit will be not that great, be overshadowed by the mature trees. And that's his caution. So he said, we are not ready to play a role in that. Some other group said, yes, provided the conditions that are spelled out, similarly to Sabah as well. Kita dengar dari segi 20 poin, Sarawak sebut 18 poin. Tak payah saya cerita panjang pasal poin ini. Bentuknya secara kesimpulan, kita bersetuju membentukkan satu negara Malaysia bersama asal berasaskan pertimbangan beberapa perkara ini masuk dalam perlembagaan. So the Malaysian Constitution now, as I understand it, do contain many the items that were put as conditional to the entry. Jadi dari segi satu yang menarik pemimpin-pemimpin dari Sabah dan Sarawak waktu itu untuk bersetuju ialah harapan mereka bahawa ekonomi di North Borneo dan Sabah masa itu dan ekonomi di Sarawak berpeluang untuk meningkat apabila bergabung dengan. So, economic attraction and promise was the item that persuaded people, leaders in those days to agree, quite apart from the security angle. Now, of course, looking back now, we read, there are discussions out there about how is MA 63. Now, MA 63 contains various items, but I'm going to concentrate purely on the economic impact of it. An economic impact is, unfortunately, Sarawak and Sabah, now I'll be dishonest if I don't say this, leaders even feel that that hope and that prospect doesn't seem to be realized fully. I'm not saying there's no. I think everybody there will accept. There is marked improvement. Extreme poverty has gone down. Actual physical development is being seen, is ongoing. But they feel we contribute, Sarawak 3% of the GDP in the country, Sabah 6%, or something like that. My figures, don't believe me, I think you check that. But the point is, they said the income from Malaysia, quite a lot of it is contributed by Sabah and Sarawak because of the oil and the gas and thing. And they're saying, do we get back reasonable amounts of that revenue income to help us build the economic growth in Sarawak or in Sabah? I think I would be dishonest if I don't say this to you. The general feeling is we should have got much more than what we got. And that is the general feeling. And I'm not saying this is a feeling of the ordinary man alone. I'm saying increasingly now, that is also the feeling among the leaders, political leaders in Sarawak and in Sabah. So in going forward, in order to realize a better reduction of what is perceived to be an imbalance between regions, is how to increase development allocation to Sarawak and Sabah. We now read in the papers Sabah talking about 40% of the revenue should go back to the state. Now Sabah and Sarawak has already got back their sales tax on oil and petroleum. Of course, the main issue now is how to get enough funding for the development of the state, and then whether we like it or not, the issue of the oil on the continental shelf become the main topic of discussion. I think this topic is going to continue, and that how the leaders resolve this topic will affect the relationship between the regions in this thing. That's one. Now, the second point I like to emphasize is this. This morning, we heard how Sarawak and Sabah, we're now talking of in the peninsula, the Malays, Chinese, Indians, but of course, Sarawak and Sabah, there are so many other groups, indigenous groups. And as we heard also in that slide this morning, just before lunch, where it says Malays and Bumiputra of Sarawak and Sabah. Because in Sarawak and Sabah, Bumiputras are not just Malays. In fact, the non-Malays indigenous group are the bigger group, Bumiputra in Sabah. Do they feel as if they are fully covered in that definition? I would be dishonest if I don't say this in front of you all. Many feel no. If you look at some of the research by some universities, even some years back, unfortunately, the term Bumiputra sometimes are not fully understood by people who implement the policy. Now, I have a personal anecdote. Some years back, in the 90s, when one of my daughters wanted to apply by Amanah Saham Nasional, so PNB's officers there asked her to get some document from the corregidor in Malacca to certify that she's entitled for it. And of course, the name Moggie is not common. He probably thought there's some Portuguese background to it. And so, of course, my daughter brought it to me. And I thought I would be very cynical and wrote back a letter as politely as I could, but pointing out Article 153 of the Constitution also include Bumiputra and Sabah and Sarawak, among which are Iban, and I'm Iban, so my daughter is Iban. So, of course, the poor guy in the PNB, the head guy then after that, rang me up to apologize. They got nothing to do with them, but the guy, the clerk or the security down there probably do not fully appreciate that in Sarawak or Sabah, you don't need to have a Muslim name to be Bumiputra. Now I think that problem is not as real. People are increasingly understanding it. The second anecdote I'm going to just highlight is this. I had a call from somebody in Pasir Gudang who wanted to apply for Bumiputra discount to buy houses under the Bum scheme. And they couldn't get it because, again, their names are not Muslim names. There are quite a number of people from Sabah and Sarawak residing in Pasir Gudang now. And so, fortunately, what we call Gani Osman was MB Johor at that time. I called Gani up, chit-chat with him, and he said, hey, don't worry, don't forget, I will let them know. So, of course, from then on, they were eligible to enjoy the Bumiputra discount. Just an example of how, unfortunately, when it comes to implementing things on the ground, things doesn't follow what we hope it would follow. As I said, I think less of that example exists now, but it shows to me one thing. One, it is important that our history reflect how Malaysia was formed. And when I read about what history is in this country, it tends to be more and more on Malayan history. I would hope and wish that some more of the Malaysian history and the position of Sarawak and Sabah get included and get taught in schools as part and parcel of the curriculum in schools. Because our young people going forward have to know that when they talk of Malaysia, it means Malaya, it includes also Sabah, it includes Sarawak, and the year is not 1957 as far as they're concerned, it's 1963, 16 September. We celebrated just a few days back. So I think making sure that history reflects the history of Malaysia, it has to include the role and component where Sabah and Sarawak comes in. Without that, our young people may not understand that. And secondly, that history must reflect the agreement that was formed. We read now in the papers, more and more of that being mentioned by leaders in Sarawak, how MA 63 is so important. Now, again, going to the economic aspect of development. Development has taken place. There's no doubt about it. If you go to Kuching, yes, very good. You go to Kota Kinabalu, urban extension of the urban area sudah menambah, jadi meningkat. Tetapi saya sekarang banyak free time. So I do go driving a bit. Lama sudah tak pergi Sabah, but I drive occasionally to Sarawak even now. And I choose to drive pergi ulu-ulu tempat. Because I know Kuching memang maju. Miri maju. Bentulu maju because of the activities, and particularly after the Bakun development, bringing power to support heavy industries in Semenanjau and all these things. So economic development in these places, urban areas, quite good. Ya, sekarang kita dengar pun cakap, ambition of the state government to go into hydrogen power, burning algae. All these are very good for the future, very good untuk kita menyediakan kita sendiri, pembangunan negara kita dalam masa depan. Tetapi, when you come to my age at 83, saya pun nak melihat, enjoy tempat-tempat ini sekarang. Walaupun penyediaan ke masa depan, apa yang perlu sekarang juga perlu dibuat. So, dari segi seimbangan ekonomi di antara bukan saja Semenanjung dengan Sarawak dan Sabah, tetapi di antara luar bandar dan bandar di Sabah dan Sarawak harus juga dipertingkatkan. My honest opinion, still need to be focused on now. Kerana kalau kita drive, masih gunakan logging track, 4-wheel drive, so money is still needed to bring up more rural development. And that's back to the issue of financial autonomy of the state. In order to ensure that the federation of this country can continue to be cohesive, the economy of each of the state must be given opportunity to grow. And that opportunity to grow depends on whether each of these states boleh mendapat hasil yang boleh membantu pembangunan. Di Sarawak dan Sabah, pembangunan memang susah. Keluasan tempat, Sarawak is almost as big as Peninsula minus Perlis. Sabah kurang sikit. But luas, and the rural countryside is big. You get mountainous region, you get a lot of rivers. So, unless rural development improve, it will affect perhubungan di antara kaum, kerana kebanyakan yang luar bandar sana pun kaum-kaum keturunan indigenous native of Sarawak dan Sabah. Jadi, harapan mereka harus diperingatkan. Dan untuk memperingatkan itu, bagaimana Sarawak dan Sabah boleh mendapat hasil yang boleh memberi revenue to the state. And that's why we hear now more and more talk. When Malaysia was formed, that the continental shelf, under the law, according to Sarawak and Sabah interpretation, is part and parcel of the territory of the state. Therefore, any oil and gas resource, natural resource, found and developed in the continental shelf belong to the territory of the state contiguous to the continental shelf. And that is based on the definition of boundary of the state by the Queen's Order in Council of 1954. And therefore, by 1954, the boundary of Sabah and the boundary of Sarawak, respectively, include the continental shelf contiguous to the state. And when Malaysia was formed in 1963, whichever boundary and territory that was part of the state at that time remained with the state. So that is why the argument on the continental shelf is very relevant now, because they feel that income and revenue and development of oil and gas offshore on the continental shelf actually belong to the territory to which that continental shelf is attached to. Jadi, memang itulah jadi perbincangan di antara kerajaan pusat dan kerajaan negeri sekarang, dan kita harap ianya boleh diselesaikan dengan baik untuk menentukan national unity sebagai satu negara dapat dikekalkan dan dikeraskan dalam masa depan. Jadi saya rasa saya cukuplah kerana cerita pun cerita macam ini. But my point, just to summarize, I think dari segi pendirian atau pengalaman Sabah dan Sarawak nak menarik peruntukan kemajuan negeri, dalam pengalaman saya sendiri pun suka. You know, the financial arrangement in our federation are three terms. One is capitation grant. The state gets fund from the federal through capitation grant. Capitation grant is based on population. The bigger the population, the bigger you get from the federal treasury. Obviously, Sarawak and Sabah, small population, will get very little. The third, road maintenance, capital contribution to maintain state roads. That's not much. The third is actually grant for development. Now, grant for development depends on project approval. So, if you want to propose something to do, you get to get that project approved. When the project is approved, then budget can be provided, and then you get the grant. But the need would be more than that. And Sabah and Sarawak are saying we should be given an allocation so that to us, and then the state government can then plan its own development plan based on the plan that is already given. Just one little example on how difficult it can get to get this grant approval. I was Minister of Works 1989 to 1995. On one of the projects that was implemented at that time, the building of the federal road from Kuching to Miri, and also in Sabah, from Tawau to Senakan, and then from Senakan to the west coast, crossing the, border from Senakan to Kota Kinabalu. Of course, as minister, you do have a bit of voice. You can call the staff to meet, and you can propose. But it's not necessary that they will listen to you anyway. They will have to assess it as they feel right. And it took me at least 2 years to convince the EPU to include the building of the bridge across the Rejang River in Durin, because from their calculation, socio-economic, whatever it is, population usage, probably not yet. But my view was, this will open the chance, use that as an investment to open the country. But planners may think separately. They look at the cost-benefit analysis rather than anything else. So here I was, a federal cabinet minister. I could call the EPU officers, so they came very politely, saw me, we discussed. But even then, I had to photograph myself to see the queue of car queuing up to catch the ferry at Durin Bridge crossing at that time. After 2 years, I guess, a year and a half, whatever, ding dong, ding dong. Fortunately, it was approved in principle. $1 allocation. So you have to ask again. So I'm relating this example. I hope it doesn't exist anymore. But I'm talking in the late 90s. It still existed at that time. If a cabinet minister responsible directly for infrastructure at that time needed to spend that time to deal, of course. And I'm sure the experience the state government dealing with the federal would be like that. And that's why this issue of how to get sources of independent revenue to the state that give the state a chance to do development that can catch up with the other parts of the country become a very important discussion now. So my point is this: find way to increase revenue through state. That's why the issue of oil and gas is critical. Secondly, increase the understanding of the history of the formation of Malaysia in our schools, in our curriculum. Thirdly, when you look at kemajuan dan economic transformation, di pandangan Pengalaman Sarawak dan Sabah, perlu juga di dua-dua negeri ini pun perbezaan di antara urban and rural masih ketara. Masih ketara sekali. And don't forget, those people up in the country will feel neglected and marginalized all the time. And one of the findings and some research when they did the new economic policy as it affects the Dayak group in Sarawak was they used the term, di segi new economic policy, nampaknya mereka invincible. That was one of the conclusions by one of the researchers in, can't remember what year she did. So, sorry, I keep on waffling, and I look at my watch, I think my time is enough. Thank you for listening. Terima kasih. Kalau ada tersinggung sikit ucapan, perkataan, saya minta maaf. Kena lama sudah tak bercakap di depan orang ramai macam ni. But you know what I'm trying to say. What we want is, how do we make sure that Malaysia will continue to grow as a unified, as a successful as we have been so far. In economic term, we have moved very quickly. We are the second middle income group as seen in the world. And we see investors coming in more and more now. So yes, Malaysia has been successful. But within that success, if history were to give us a guide, we have to be very conscious also of the shortcomings that may still exist and address those shortcomings. Thank you very much.